I thought maybe one interesting way to focus a discussion would be to talk about the question of what one does when one deals with the question of learning music these days. It seems as though new musical forms, new musical archetypes, new ways of doing music, and even completely new views of what instruments are and what they mean, causes us to have to re-examine the learning process of music that is traditionally considered from the point of view that music is a language that is to be acquired and goes about a certain set of exercises or certain pedagogical system which prescribes how one acquires this language that someone presupposes to know. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about musical pedagogy, what the process of learning is all about in music these days.
It's a difficult, really very difficult question. As you said, there is a kind of corpus, body of learning that is still taught in the conservatories, but which is based essentially on instrumental music of the past and of today, more or less. But if we consider in large domain the sound in all its, say, manifestations, the noises, all sorts of natural or industrial sounds produced by the hand or by computers or whatever, then the traditional education is not sufficient, doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Because traditional is based essentially on the pitch and time, much less on the timbre, and almost very little from the point of view of the transformations of forms and transformations. So this is why it's a really big problem, because we are in a period of mutation, I think. I think you have the same opinion, don't you?
I think so.
Yes.
It's taken from a broad
Yes.
cultural point of view, even almost a species point of view.
Right. So the thing is that education, therefore, should be, in the wider sense, the approach of the sound and the forms in a wider sense, which does not exist yet. And there is no way to approach sound with a systematic knowledge that will start from a point and guide the child or to be a musician in the completeness of knowledge and also how to do the things. It's too early, perhaps,
Right.
I think.
It's also a question of the kind of dichotomy of going through a learning system and the realization that many of the breakthroughs that are interesting have to do with being able to stand outside that system. Like in your case, dealing with masses of sounds requires standing outside of the language of music and having another point of view as an artist. And
yes. This situation requires a basic new approach, which should be founded, I think, in the direct making of music from the early stages, and learn how to listen by doing the things, not just, in many studios, like in France, and I think here also, laboratories, the young people are not allowed to deal directly to compose. They have to study first, step by step, which is very boring and inhibiting, I think, finally.
It makes me think of Piaget, what you're saying, in the sense that there are those two views of language that you might describe by contrasting Piaget and Chomsky, say. That one view is that it is ultimately based on a syntactical structure that one learns and those people speak of acquiring something called linguistic competence. That's what you do when you learn language. Whereas Piaget would say something more like what you acquire is something called communicative competence, which has not necessarily to do with learning a syntax in that sense. So, for instance, learning to play the piano might have to involve the child making any kind of sound with it that he can in any way that interests him before he's exposed to the keyboard even.
Yeah, right, yes. But I think that the main problem is not to learn how to play of an instrument, because it's a real technique which is difficult. And if you try to enter the child into music through that channel, it's a very narrow channel, very long. I think that the best is to enter it directly into the composition. And I am saying that because this system that we have developed in Paris,
system.
the UPIC, that allows by drawing on a board to create the waveforms, the envelopes, and the scores directly, to listen to them, to correct them, to change, and so on, which also includes the traditional sounds, or traditional kind of approach of composition. But the best way to learn something is by doing it. In any domain. If you want to be a mathematician, you have to invent theorems, for instance.
Yeah, that seems to be approaching a kind of ideal tool to work with in that sense, because it doesn't prohibit the development or the acquisition of fine control of something. Or using structures that are very well ordered, but it also allows for very free
absolutely
exploration.
a wider horizon of music, which can be also completed by, say, higher order functions that you give the possibility with very few, let's say, touch buttons or things like that to implement in the compositional work. And then you might, if you are interested, study closer what you have inserted.
Right.
But another problem is where the music should be taught. Is it in conservatories or where?
Oh, yes. Well, that's almost a socio-political question.
I think that art has been neglected since industrial era, because before, especially music, was something that was alive. Everybody could think about it. Was much simpler, of course. Melodic patterns, and invent and sing, participate to the musical life. But after that, there was a dichotomy, which was more than that. It was killing the invention, musical invention. But on the contrary, we have, as if we take the scientific domain, which was absolutely neglected in the Middle Ages, then we see that with industry it became very important to have as many people as possible learning how to count, mathematics, and literature, that is, how to write, and some knowledge which are in physics, which are basic. This is what we do in the primary school and also in the high school during long years. But art is absolutely out of this pedagogy, I mean the general pedagogy of, at least say, maybe, I am speaking about music, maybe in places like Germany or even England, the music is taught, but in a very traditional way, which stops the evolution of creativity, because it's old music that is taught. It's like teaching mathematics that belong to the ancient mathematics, or the same for physics, plain Newtonian.
Right.
So I think that the education should be in the national system of education, that is in schools, and not in ghettos like conservatories.
Right.
Conservatories could be some specific training, for instance, instrumental or things like that. But how to compose should be in the schools, with adequate, appropriate tools, of course.
Right. That seems to be essential. I'm reminded of one phrase from an article that Robert Ashley wrote, where he said one goal is to find out how to be in the condition of learning more and to spend less time watching the baggage, by which he meant less devoting of the idea of education to preserving something.
I agree with that.
And more time in the process of evolution.
Yes.
I was just also thinking that when one thinks about things like designing tools to use to make sound, one has to resolve that dichotomy of thinking about the input structures as devices that could, let's say, sense body motions in as easily in a way that's simple, so that almost anyone could make something interesting, but yet also think about the music which results from repetitive application of some discipline that one may invent for oneself, hopefully. In other words, make it sufficient to both goals without fettering the scope of conscious thinking about art.
Yes, the thing is that in order to introduce music in the system, the national educational system, that is very difficult because the people that have responsibility of the programs, they do not care.
Right.
They are not oriented in that sense. They don't see why art should be something important. I speak now in general about art. Something important. Why should art be on the same level as sciences or scientific knowledge or mathematical or even historical knowledge? We teach much more history in the schools than anything else. Too much, I think, history, in the bad sense.
Right.
I think that this is a evolution that has to be done at all these decision-making levels of including the universities, of course, because there is no reason why in the university these branches of human activity should not be part of the more general one. For instance, I don't see why a physicist should not try and do composition, because the things that are musical composition, because the things that he's dealing with are so close in many ways with the musical problems of morphology or higher or lower levels. And vice versa, the artist should. Therefore, that implies an interdisciplinary also approach, and that means a complete reorganization of the programs.
Right.
In the schools for music and for art in general, because art is not just, the visual arts, not just painting, it's also TV, it's also computers and everything like that, which will develop very fast, I think, in the few years coming. So it's interesting, for instance, for a student in musical composition to acquire some of the branches of the very important branches of mathematics. I would say the cycle of so-called finite mathematics as a first step, which introduces him into set theory, into probabilities, into combinatorial calculation, into matrices, into also even game theory. That are minimal knowledge that is interesting. Markov chains, for instance. Right. It's not difficult to acquire. It's very simple, especially with new manuals that are today. And besides that, to make a whole revolution in musicology, to see and to study the past with absolutely new mental tools.
Right.
And not being like, it's like looking at a forest from outside and not from inside.
Right.
You don't explain anything when you say that the polyphony, for instance, are these rules, such and such, such. When you do not link it to a much more general situation.
Right.
Don't you think so?
I think so. You have to link it to the evolution of human thought almost at the time. And in thinking about history, I've always been suspicious of history because I see how the history of the present is being written, and that's totally inaccurate in many respects. And so why should the history of any other period be any more accurate? So it's not a question of trying to achieve accuracy in history, but in trying to see from it what you can extract about the evolution of thinking, let's say, and try to apply that to how you might further it in some big direction now.
Yes, of course, this renewal of the study of the past is not easy. It's not easy, but I can give you an example. When in polyphony you teach that there are 4 forms for a melodic pattern to use, how to use it. For instance, the direct form, the retrograde, the inversion, and the inversion of the retrograde. Okay, that was introduced in the Renaissance. Now, this is not linked to a much more general structure, which is the group structure.
Right.
That exists in other domains in music as well.
Examination of symmetries.
Examination of no, even for instance, when you say I add melodic intervals, this is a group, or time intervals, or whatever intervals you may use in music. You are using a group. Now, if this was taught that way, then immediately and then link it to symmetry, as you said, problem of symmetry, then immediate cycling and periodicity, time-wise or timeless, that is outside of time, then immediately the student, I mean the composer, let's say, has a much larger view, and his decisions are safer and much more rich than if they are not just like a parrot. He's learning by heart or things that are cut from the general landscape of human thought of today. Now, these are simple, small examples, but such a work has to be done much more systematic by the new people that will have new minds and also could completely revolutionize the musicological domain of the music of the past with new ideas. And that way make a kind of synthesis and not just a cut between the past and the present and the future. Because it's the same flow, it seems to me.
Right. It seems as though, thinking of it that way, it wouldn't be difficult for a composer, say, to have many more tools at his disposal than he really is aware of that exist and are not difficult, as you say, to acquire. Studying aspects of musical attention, that is to say, the mechanisms by which our attention is directed in such a way that we can arrive at an image of a piece, let's say, or a musical experience, or any artistic experience, which is, according to current theories of memory and so on, is something that is storable and aids us in regenerating the experience from memory and so on. There are various views of that. One common one is the hierarchical view, that we start at an elemental level by activating a mechanism that allows us to perceive groupings either in space or in time, and then by rehearsal and memory or hearing things more, construct hierarchical stackings of groups, and we somehow arrive at the top of this thing, which a useful word is sometimes the ideologue of this event. And some of Jim Tenney's work is very interesting in that regard, and some interesting work.
Theoretically.
Yes, theoretically, and then some of the physiological evidence that is based on the idea of the nervous system as basically a detector of change, and investigating the mechanisms by which it finds what we call structurally significant events. In your music, I find in perceiving it, that I go through some process of extracting the large architecture of the piece that's I devote attention to, energy to, in a certain sense. I can't describe necessarily the step-by-step mechanism by which I arrive at that image, but I do arrive at it, and it's something that involves a certain kind of vigilance of attention, and from it you extract and you arrive at this. And of course, there are many different views of memory and how that fits within those views is interesting. Also, the other views of memory as being a series of sequentially triggered recall events. That the way you remember a piece is, say, for instance, as you hear the first event, and then that triggers the memory of the second, and that triggers the memory of the third, which seems to be a different view of memory, musical memory. And then, of course, there are the controversial views about the holographic image of memory. The Carl Pribram and David Bohm, those kinds of ideas. And I wonder if you think about those things in relation to music and in musical perception.
I must say that I don't know much of the theories that are about how to grasp the forms in music. When I work myself, I do that in a kind of at the same time conscious and unconscious way. And after the piece is finished, I try to understand what I've done, but not with much effort, because it is done, you see.
Right.
But I think that what you said about the change is something very natural. I believe that also the fact that you perceive chunks that is large parts of a piece as a whole, and then there is an interruption and you go to another one, because maybe in the meantime you had to digest what you had just heard, and you go to the next one because you are free to do that. And if you listen to it because you are interested more than once to the same piece, then finally you have a more general picture. All these are probably working together, these mechanisms first of all, understanding and storing that in your memory, both at the same time. Although sometimes you can store in memory things that you do not understand, because they are like a photographic plate. But the time factor in understanding an architecture which lasts for a time, for a long time, it's I think is very very complicated. When you have a painting or architecture which is static there, it's much easier for you to form the image in yourself and to have an overall but also detailed comprehension.
It seems maybe one difference is that there you control your own scanning of that experience.
Yes, with your memory.
Right, and the mechanisms that you might call feature extractors that pull those things out.
That's right.
But in the time experience, you're not in control of that. It's coming by you.
It's coming. Unless you know very well a piece, which in that case allows you to jump from one place to another, or that same piece, and to integrate what you have done, which means that you have to extract this basic mechanism out of the flow of the time, a kind of image which is there in yourself in a kind of static way, and you can select the part that you need or you are interested in, and to link it later on with another one. Some times ago I was thinking, how is it possible to condense, say, a symphony, Beethoven's symphony, in a very short span of time, so all the architecture, the piece, it's compacted.
Yeah.
Is that possible
Right.
or not? You see, because you can play it slower or faster.
Right.
But then is it a limit to that? Or is it possible to have such a instantaneous comprehension of a piece with
Right.
all its problems inside at the
Right.
end of time?
Well, I think in retrospect that may happen in our minds sometimes when we hear the piece, let's say, in its normal speed, and then it may be there somehow rattling around in our brains, and then there are those flashes where you suddenly see the structure, or you suddenly see an idea in it, you know, that just happens to you, and it happens at those instants. It reminds me of those experiments with speech where you chop out certain portions of the word, and you see how much you can remove you can just splice it out of the tape and still make the speech understandable. And now there are those devices that are sold to TV stations that allow them to take a show or a commercial, let's say, and compact the whole thing, or it can expand it to fit the prescribed time frame. So it's curious, but that happens in perception also. That subjective time, we might call it, the feeling of things going by, or the feeling of time going faster or slower. And you can manipulate that with music. Yeah.
You said going faster or slower. One of the most immediate, powerful perception is that of the speed of the things that happen, and that is the proportions, time-wise.
Right.
And this enables you to inscribe the thing that you're hearing to compartments, and slower or faster, together with the architecture, inside architecture.
Right. Because it's really rate of change, or
Yes.
change of rate of change that we're looking at.
Also, yes.
Yeah.
But to all this, the defense of our mind, at least of my mind, is by trying to understand relationships which are more or less more abstract than what I really hear. This is the way that I try to memorize and to keep in mind things. Perhaps not in a conscious way, but I do that by sound images of what I've heard, and relating them in a more abstract way, then because that's also a way that I try to escape from the fashion of understanding music at a given time.
Right.
I try to understand music for its own, you see. For instance, if I listen to a romantic music, I try not to be romantic at all, but to listen to music in a absolute as much as possible.
Right.
Like Schumann or Brahms or whatever.
Removing the stylistic
Yes, removing the weight, emotional weight that one supposed to give to that, put on that music.
Right.
Which is important, because if that music has to survive, and it survives not because of the emotional weight, which vanishes with time, change, but because of the relationship that are inside this music, like the Bach music. Who knows how it was played, and meaning of emotional meaning of such or such pattern, melodic pattern. Who knows about it? Nobody.
But it survived, and it's here.
But this survived, yes. And I think this is due to the relationship that exists among the sounds, architecture, all the movement, the speed, the densities, all these parameters, characteristics, on higher or lower levels.
Do you think there are cultural universals, or artistic universals in expression? That is to say, things which might be genetic in a sense, in the way in which we form. I want to say expression, but I don't mean to limit that as that music is expression, but that there are forms of output that come
on
from
the higher
human
level.
beings. Yes,
on the higher level.
that are somehow atomistic or morphological?
I think from my poor experience that there are things that are universal in the sense that they are very close to natural expressions of man, for sorrow, for instance, or pain.
Right.
A man shouts somehow in certain way that you can find everywhere.
Right.
The laughing is the same everywhere.
Right. Right.
Or weeping and so on. And therefore, in music, sometimes you find no, I wouldn't say imitations, but forms which resemble to that. And therefore, if that was written by a Japanese or by an African, and you listen to them, you see, that must be like that. I remember when I heard the kabuki theater or in Japan, or the puppet theater, which is in Kyoto, no, in Osaka, the famous one. The way, realistic way that they tell the stories, crying or shouting and whatever, is like you do that in any part of the world. And music is very much colored by these things. So this is another problem for the composer to escape from these obvious and realistic patterns, which is very difficult. You think that sometimes you do abstract things, nothing doing with all these realistic expressions of man, but I don't know, it happened to me very often. But they are similar to some forms of human expression. So in that sense, they are invariant, that is, they are universals. But if they are innate or not, that I cannot say, I don't know.
There is the work of this man, Manfred Clynes, who claims to be able to detect responses in the electrical signals of the nervous system and the muscles, and in respect to expressing some of those natural things that you enumerated, but also in respect to music. That is, he has this pressure transducer, and people tap out time while listening to music, and if they're sufficiently familiar with the music, a certain curve appears, and that curve appears to be the same no matter who is doing the tapping. The conclusions to that are very controversial, but one of them is that there's an innate pulse of the music which is somehow transmitted by this person to this touch sensor, and it's fixed. It's part of the music if the music is strong music. And of course, he's only looking at regular music, at music with regular rhythms. But there are some other interesting things. I've looked at brain signals from actors who are, especially method actors, who attempt to perfect their craft by exercising, going from one state to another state to another state to another state, and then repeating this and going around in a kind of rhythmic way. And the spectral content and the coherence functions of the brain signals becomes very characteristic for each of those states. So, which you might expect in the case of a method actor, where they're really trying to be in that that state, whatever it is. But if there are such output forms that are somehow atomistic or morphological or genetic in a way, it's interesting to look and see what the architecture of those forms really might be. The idea of extracting the pressure curves may be a controversial one, but it is interesting in a number of lights. It leads, for instance, maybe to thinking of the keyboard, which is intelligent enough to be able to recognize several different forms of tapping or touching it as independently programmable stimuli, let's say, or something. But I guess then there are people who have looked at this from the movements of dancers and body gestures, that, and some people claim that there are such universals.
Yes, except for the other forms of music which are similar to noises that that man does when he's in pain or he's in sorrow or laughing or happy or I don't know, which are universal. There are at a lower level things that everywhere on the earth I've noticed are similar. For instance, the necessity to have scales in the pitch domain.
Yeah.
You have everywhere in the world, where, even if the scales are very small, with 2 or 3 notes, there are scales.
Right.
That is, there is a discrete comprehension of sound,
Right.
and therefore a kind of combinatorial structuring that is obtained. So, and also besides that, at a little higher level, you have the possibility to combine intervals, which is again something, intervals of time or of pitch. I speak about this because this is the thing that you observe everywhere very easily. I don't speak about the color or tone or dynamics, which is much more evanescent, but much more subtle and difficult. So another that I observe is except for the octave, which is not everywhere correct, that the octave is comparable to the unison. But you have the fourth. The fourth as an interval is a very characteristic interval in almost all the cultures. Why? I have no idea.
Right.
I don't think that this comes from the elastic resonance.
Right.
That is the harmonic analysis, because you have a ratio 4:3. That is the fourth sound and the third sound that produce this ratio of frequencies. I don't think that this comes from that. Or
Some
maybe.
people search for the answer to that in the mechanisms of the ear and the auditory recognition system. I wonder if that's
Which,
I don't know if it's there or not.
Yes, I don't know if physically it's there or maybe in the brain, but is acquired and not innate.
Right.
But at least the fourth is something that is everywhere. For instance, in the no music, you have 2 fourths, which is conjuncted. That is, they are not like in the white scale, in the white key scales of the piano, where you have 2 fourths. It's exactly the same, but separated by a tone, whole tone, which is they produce the fifth. You have the C, D, E, F, then a jump of 1 tone, and you start again. Tone, 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 half tone, and you complete the octave. In the no, you have 2 tetrachords that are linked together, and that means that the octave is absolutely not necessary, but the fourth is there as a very ancient.
So those things are atomistic and morphological also, it seems.
Yes.
For why we don't know, but they are there.
I ask you, do you know?
No, I don't know. There's the inside search for them, and then there's the search for them in physics, in some form of understanding of the vibratory phenomena. But I don't know which place is the right place to look. I don't know that anyone does.
Okay.
We could stop there.
We can stop there, maybe.
Very good. Good job.
Good job, you think so?
Yeah.
From outside, as an outsider?
As an outsider looking in.
Yes, because we are inside and it's difficult to judge.
Right.
It's worthwhile.
Definitely.
You won't erase it.
No, I promise we won't.
You could.
Unless there's good cartoons on Saturday morning. No, it was fine.